I discovered the truth by accident. Financial statements that rewrote 20 years of sacrifice into something ugly and expendable. My name is Jack Hollis, and I'm 49 years old. Each morning, I wake before dawn in the same quiet house where I raised my daughter Ava Hollis on weekends after the divorce. When she called to tell me her stepfather Rick Nolan would walk her down the aisle because he raised her, my coffee mug slipped from my fingers. My ex-wife Tara Hollis had finally succeeded in erasing me completely. I stood frozen in my kitchen, the bitter smell of spilled coffee filling the air as my world collapsed. Every overtime shift, every college fund payment, every birthday I'd never missed, all rewritten by the man who spent my money while taking my place. I won't be the villain in my own life story. Those who steal more than money will face more than regret. Before I go any further, let me know in the comments where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow I will share a story you don't want to miss. But let me start from the beginning. It was barely 7 in the morning when my phone rang. I'd been up since 5. Habit from years of construction sites and early client meetings. The spring sun was just starting to warm my kitchen when Ava's name lit up my screen. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, smiling into the phone. Ava hardly ever called this early. There was a pause, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. "Dad," she said, her voice measured in that careful way adults use when they've rehearsed something difficult. "I need to talk to you about the wedding." I poured another cup of coffee, still smiling. "Sure thing. Need me to chip in more for the flowers? Those arrangements you showed me last month weren't cheap." "No, it's not about money." Another pause, longer this time. "It's about the ceremony itself." I sat down at my kitchen table, the one where I'd helped her with science projects and college applications, the one where we'd had Sunday breakfast every other weekend for years. "Dad, I've been thinking a lot about this, and you're not going to be invited to the wedding." The words didn't make sense at first. They floated there like someone speaking a language I almost understood. "What do you mean, not invited?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "Rick's walking me down the aisle," she continued, her voice still unnaturally calm. "He raised me, Dad. It makes more sense this way." I felt my hand tighten around my mug. Rick Nolan, my ex-wife's husband of 11 years, the man who moved into my old house when Ava was 12. "He raised you?" The question came out hollow. "Ava, I was there every weekend. Every school event. I know you tried," she cut in, "but Rick was there every day. He helped with homework. He drove me to practice. He was just there." My mind flashed back to the double shifts I worked to pay child support that was triple the state minimum. The overtime I put in to build her college fund while Tara complained I wasn't involved enough. "Is this your mom's idea?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "No," Ava said quickly. Too quickly. "This is my decision. I've thought about it a lot." "I see." But I didn't see. Not really. "And what about all the conversations we've had about the wedding? The venue deposits I've been helping with?" "I appreciate that," she said, sounding almost businesslike. "But this is what I want." When we hung up, I sat staring at the wall for nearly 20 minutes. Not in rage. In pure, blank confusion. This wasn't my daughter. Not the girl who called me first when she got into college. Not the woman who asked for my advice on her first apartment lease. I dumped my cold coffee down the sink, watching the brown liquid swirl away. Then I pulled out my phone and scrolled through our text history. Discussions about catering costs, venue options, DJ deposits. But looking closer, I noticed something. Every vendor contact came from Tara's email. Every final decision was filtered through my ex-wife. Had I been slowly pushed aside without even noticing? By evening, confusion had crystallized into something harder. I grabbed my keys and headed to my truck. The spring air felt too warm against my skin as I drove the 15 miles to Tara and Rick's 2-story colonial, the house my child support payments had helped maintain for over a decade. I parked on the street rather than the driveway. A visitor, not family. That's what they'd made clear. The porch light flicked on as I approached. I rang the bell once and waited, hands in my pockets to keep them steady. I heard footsteps, then the deadbolt sliding back. Ava opened the door, her eyes widening when she saw me. She wore a university sweatshirt I'd given her 2 Christmases ago. Behind her, I caught a glimpse of wedding magazines spread across the coffee table. "Dad," she said, surprise and something like guilt crossing her face. Tara appeared in the hallway behind her, arms crossing defensively over her chest. "We need to talk face to face about family," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. The next morning, I spread everything across my kitchen table. Child support receipts, bank statements, a timeline I'd scribbled on the back of an envelope. My coffee sat untouched beside me, gone cold while I'd been lost in numbers that didn't add up. For 15 years, I'd paid premium child support, far above what the court required. I wanted Ava to have everything: dance lessons, SAT prep, college visits, but most importantly, I'd built her a college fund that should have been substantial by now. The doorbell rang just after 9. Luis Ortega stood on my porch, a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. I'd called him last night, after leaving Tara's place. "You look like hell," he said, stepping inside. I managed a thin smile. "Good to see you, too." Luis and I had known each other since our 20s. He'd become a CPA while I built my contracting business. He'd done my taxes for years, helped me set up Ava's college fund, and stood by me through the divorce. "So," he said, setting his bag on the table, "tell me exactly what happened." I walked him through everything. The wedding call, the confrontation at Tara's, the years of suspicion finally crystallizing. "Remember when I set up that 529 plan for Ava?" I asked. Luis nodded. "You were putting in almost a quarter of your income some years. Tara was supposed to be the custodian, part of our agreement, but she would never show me statements." Luis pulled out his laptop. "Let's get access now. You should still be listed on the account." 3 hours later, we had our answer. The account that should have held over $180,000 showed a balance of $17,322. "Look at these withdrawals," Luis said, pointing at the screen. "House expenses, emergency renovations, vehicle replacement." I leaned closer. "Those aren't qualified educational expenses. Not even close." Luis pulled up another screen. "And here, 3 years ago, they took out $42,000 labeled tuition. But Ava was on scholarship that year." I remembered Ava calling to tell me she'd won that scholarship. I'd been so proud. Meanwhile, her mother and stepfather were raiding her future. Luis made some calculations on a legal pad. "Jack, they've misappropriated at least $163,000 over the last decade." The anger that washed over me wasn't hot. It was cold, clarifying, like stepping into winter air after being in a smoky room. "All those years Rick played the hero," I said quietly, "taking her shopping, buying her first car. He was using my money while I worked double shifts. And systematically erasing you from the narrative," Luis added. "It's financial fraud, but it's also theft of a relationship," I finished. Luis looked at me steadily. "What do you want to do?" I thought about Ava's face when she told me I wasn't invited to her wedding, the confusion in her eyes at Tara's house. She truly believed their version of our history. "I want them to face consequences," I said finally. "Real ones." That night, after Luis left with copies of everything, I called Kim Nguyen. She'd represented me in the divorce and had been my attorney ever since. "Jack," she answered. "It's been a while." I laid out what we'd found. Kim listened without interrupting, then sighed heavily. "This is serious," she said. "The misuse of educational funds creates several legal angles we could pursue." "I want to go after them," I said. "All of it." "Before you do anything public," Kim cautioned, "we need to gather every piece of evidence. Bank records, texts, emails, anything showing what they did with that money and how they've misrepresented things to Ava. And then we can file both civil and potentially criminal complaints. But Jack, her voice softened, have you considered what this will do to your relationship with your daughter? I'd thought of little else. They've already poisoned that well, Kim. She thinks I abandoned her while they supported her. The truth can't make it worse. It can always get worse, Kim said quietly. Think carefully. Call me tomorrow after you've slept on it. But sleep didn't come. I sat at my desk until 3 a.m., printing every document, organizing them chronologically. The evidence was damning. Not just the financial fraud, but the pattern of replacing me in Ava's life while using my money to do it. By dawn, I knew what I needed to do first. Before lawyers and courts, before the whole thing exploded, Ava deserved to hear it from me. I picked up my phone and found her contact. My thumb hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then I typed, "Coffee tomorrow? Just talk. No pressure." I pressed send and watched the message status change to delivered. Now all I could do was wait. The morning sun spilled across my kitchen table, illuminating the mess of bank statements and receipts I'd spent hours organizing into neat stacks. Each piece of paper felt like a puzzle piece I'd been missing for years. My coffee had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. The truth was right in front of me. When Luis knocked on my door around 10, I'd already filled a legal pad with questions and suspicions. I'd known Luis Ortega since we were both starting out. Me in construction, him in accounting. 20 years of friendship meant he didn't hesitate when I called and asked for help. "Jesus, Jack," he said, surveying the paper landscape across my kitchen. "You weren't kidding. Thanks for coming." I pulled out a chair for him. "I need a professional to make sense of all this." Luis set his laptop on the table, sliding his glasses up his nose. "Start from the beginning. What exactly are we looking for?" "The 529 college account I set up for Ava when she was 8, I said, pushing a folder toward him. "I've been contributing to it religiously since the divorce. Tara was the custodian, but I was supposed to have access. Somehow, I never got statements." Luis's eyes narrowed. "And you never followed up?" Tara always had excuses. The papers went to her address. She'd send them later. The investments were doing fine. I shook my head. After a while, fighting about it just seemed like another reason for Ava to see conflict. "Classic manipulation tactic," Luis muttered, opening his laptop. "Let's see what we can find." The next 3 hours were meticulous detective work. With Luis's expertise, we managed to access the account records. What we found made my stomach turn. "This doesn't make sense," Luis said, pointing at the screen. "You've put in over $200,000 over the years, but the current balance is only $17,000. How is that possible?" Luis clicked through several screens, his expression growing darker. "Multiple withdrawals. Look at these labels. Emergency home renovation, family vehicle replacement, medical expenses." He shook his head. "None of these are qualified educational expenses." I leaned in, reading the descriptions. Dates and amounts jumped out at me. $32,000 for home improvement, right when Rick and Tara had renovated their kitchen. $2,500 for transportation needs. The same month, Rick started driving a new truck. It was all there. "What about this one?" I pointed to a $42,000 withdrawal labeled university expenses. Luis checked the date. 3 years ago? He looked at me. Wasn't that when Ava got that big scholarship? The memory hit me like a physical blow. Ava had called, excited about winning a full tuition scholarship for her sophomore year. I'd been so proud, thinking how much of her college fund we'd saved. "They took it anyway," I whispered. "They used her scholarship as an opportunity to grab more money." Luis made some calculations on a legal pad, his methodical nature a stark contrast to the storm building inside me. Finally, he set down his pen. "Jack, I'm sorry, but there's no other way to say this. They've misappropriated at least $163,000 from Ava's future. And since this is a 529 account, there are tax implications too." I sat back in my chair, a cold clarity washing over me. So all those years Rick played the hero, buying her a car for graduation, taking her on that trip to Europe. He was using my money. "While you worked overtime to keep funding the account," Luis added quietly. I ran my hands over my face. No wonder they don't want me at the wedding. I'm the only one who knows the truth. Luis closed his laptop. "What do you want to do about this?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But I need to talk to Kim." After Luis left with copies of everything, I called Kim Nguyen that evening. She'd been my attorney during the divorce and had become something of a friend over the years. "This is serious," she said, after I explained what we'd found. "It's fraud, potentially criminal. But Jack, tread carefully. If you want to pursue this legally, we need to gather evidence quietly." "What are my options?" I asked. "Several," Kim replied. "Civil suit for the misappropriated funds, possible criminal charges for fraud. But before you do anything, think about what you want the end result to be." "I want the truth to come out," I said immediately. "And I want them to face consequences. And Ava, how will this affect her?" I paused at that. "She deserves to know they've been lying to her. That all this time, I was the one making sacrifices while they took credit." "Then start there," Kim advised. "But document everything first. We'll need it all if this goes to court." The next morning, I printed every statement, every withdrawal record. Looking at the stack of evidence, I felt both vindication and a deep sadness. Years of deception laid bare on paper. I picked up my phone and found Ava's contact. My thumb hovered over the screen. Would she even believe me? Or was I about to lose her completely? After a long moment, I typed, "Coffee tomorrow? Just talk. No pressure." I pressed send and watched the message status change to delivered. The morning crowd had thinned out when I arrived at Molly's diner. Only a few tables were occupied, a pair of retirees by the window, a lone businessman reading his paper, and a harried mother trying to keep her toddler entertained. The familiar smell of coffee and pancakes wrapped around me like an old sweater as I chose a booth in the back corner. I ordered coffee and waited, checking my watch every minute or so. Part of me didn't expect Ava to show. Why would she? She'd made her choice clear enough on the phone. The bell above the door jingled at 10:07. Ava stepped inside, scanning the room until her eyes found mine. She wore her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dressed in jeans and a light sweater. Casual, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I stood as she approached, caught between wanting to hug her and knowing we weren't there yet. "Hi, Dad," she said softly. "Thanks for coming." I gestured to the seat across from me. "Coffee?" She nodded, sliding into the booth with careful movements, like she was testing thin ice. The waitress, Darlene, her name tag read, swooped in with the coffee pot. "Refill, sir? And fresh cup for the young lady?" "Please," I said. "You two ready to order, or need a minute?" "Just coffee for now," Ava replied, offering a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. When Darlene left, silence settled between us. I remembered teaching Ava to ride a bike, bandaging skinned knees, helping with algebra homework. Now we sat like acquaintances at a business meeting. "How's Ben?" I asked, referring to her fiancé. "He's good. Busy with work." She stirred her coffee without drinking it. "Dad, why did you want to meet?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't going to be easy. "I need to show you something." I reached down beside me and pulled out a manila folder. It had a single word written on the tab in black marker. Truth. I slid it across the table. "Before you make your final decision about the wedding, you should know what's in here." She stared at the folder like it might bite. "What is this?" "Just look," I said quietly. "Please." Hesitantly, She opened it. Inside were bank statements, transaction records, and transfer memos, all neatly organized with colored tabs and highlights. Her brow furrowed as she began to read. I watched her expression shift from confusion to disbelief as she turned each page. The records told a clear story: systematic withdrawals from her college fund, money transferred directly to Rick and Tara's joint account. Her fingers traced one particular line item: a $12,000 withdrawal labeled educational expense, dated 2 weeks before her 16th birthday. The same day, Rick had surprised her with her first car. "This can't be right," she whispered. "Keep reading," I said gently. She did. Page after page of financial sleight of hand. The European trip she'd thought was Rick's generosity. The laptop for college. The down payment on her apartment during senior year. All of it, every grand gesture Rick had claimed credit for, traced directly back to money I had contributed. She looked up, eyes glistening. "Mom told me you stopped contributing after the divorce, that you only paid the minimum." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "I've been working like a dog to give you a life you deserve, but I guess that's one of my bad decisions." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "That's cruel." "It's true," I countered. "Every extra shift, every weekend job, it all went into that account, for you. While I gestured to the papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the folder. "Why are you showing me this now?" "Because you deserve the truth. Because I don't want to fight him through you. I just want you to know where I stand." She stared at her untouched coffee. "I need to think about all this. Take whatever time you need." We sat in silence for another minute. Finally, she gathered the folder and stood. "I should go." I nodded, not trusting my voice. At the edge of the table, she paused. "For what it's worth, I never knew." "I believe you," I said. We didn't hug goodbye. She walked out with the folder pressed tightly against her chest, and I watched through the window as she got into her car. She sat there for a long moment, before driving away. Darlene appeared with the coffee pot again. "Everything okay, hun?" I nodded, though nothing was okay. "Just the check, please." That evening, I sat on my back deck watching the sunset, wondering if I'd done the right thing or just made everything worse. The chirp of my phone interrupted my thoughts. A text notification, but it wasn't from Ava. It was an email alert about a certified letter waiting for me at the post office. The sender, County Circuit Court. I stopped at my mailbox after work the following evening, expecting the usual mix of bills and junk mail. Among the stack was a formal envelope with the county clerk of court's seal in the corner. My stomach tightened as I tore it open right there in my driveway. Inside was a court order with bold letters across the top. Temporary restraining order. I scanned the document, my hands growing cold despite the mild spring evening. Tara had filed for protection, claiming I'd made threatening statements and expressed intent to sabotage the wedding ceremony. Rick's sworn statement backed her version, describing me as increasingly unstable and fixated on disrupting the celebration. It was all lies, calculated, deliberate lies. I sat in my truck, the engine off, staring at the paper that effectively labeled me dangerous. The same man who'd taught Ava to check for monsters under her bed was now officially the monster. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't hurt so damn much. My fingers fumbled with my phone as I dialed Kim's number. "Kim Nguyen," she answered crisply. "They filed a restraining order against me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. A brief pause. "I'll meet you at my office tomorrow morning, 7:30. Bring everything we discussed, plus any communications you've had with any of them. Don't contact Ava, Tara, or Rick before then." "I wouldn't." "I know you wouldn't," she said, softening slightly. "But they're clearly setting a trap. Don't give them more ammunition." I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the words on that order. Poses, credible threat. It was one thing to be excluded from my daughter's wedding. It was another to be painted as someone she needed protection from. By 7 the next morning, I was in Kim's office with a box of documents. She arrived with 2 coffees and her game face on. "They're playing dirty," she said, reviewing the order. "But sloppy. This gives us a chance to get everything on record." We spent 3 hours preparing. Kim drafted my affidavit refuting each claim. She called Luis, who agreed to testify about the financial records. Most importantly, she played Rick's voicemail from 2 years ago, the one where he'd called to gloat about using Ava's little fund for their kitchen remodel because what's she gonna do? Check the accounts? I'd saved it out of disgust. Now it was evidence. "This is our ace," Kim said. "But Jack," she looked at me seriously, "winning this battle might cost you the war with Ava. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about it, rubbing my thumb against the worn edge of my wallet where Ava's childhood photos still sat. If I back down now, I let them rewrite who I am. Not just to her, but in court records. Forever. I shook my head. Some prices are too high. The hearing was scheduled 5 days later. 5 days of watching my phone, hoping for a text from Ava that never came. 5 days of wondering if she'd seen the court filing, if she believed their version or questioned it. When the day arrived, Kim met me on the courthouse steps. "Remember, stay calm. Let me do the talking. Even if they provoke you." She straightened my tie. "You're not what they're painting you as. The judge will see that." Inside, Tara sat with her attorney, dabbing theatrical tears from the corners of her eyes. Rick stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, wearing an expression of concerned protectiveness. When they saw me, Rick's face hardened with practiced contempt. The judge, an older man with steel-rimmed glasses, called the hearing to order. Tara's attorney presented their case, painting me as bitter and threatening. When my turn came, Kim calmly introduced the financial documents, then asked permission to play an audio file. Rick shifted uncomfortably as his own voice filled the courtroom, bragging about redirecting Ava's money. The judge's expression hardened with each word. When the recording ended, the silence felt physical. "Your Honor," Kim concluded, "Mr. Hollis shared financial truths with his daughter. That's not a threat. It's parenting." The judge took exactly 2 minutes to make his decision. He denied the restraining order and issued a stern warning to Tara about the consequences of false statements to the court. "Mrs. Hollis, this appears to be an attempt to use this court to further personal grievances. I strongly advise against any similar filings without substantial cause." It was over. We'd won. Outside, I stood alone on the courthouse steps, breathing in the cold morning air. Couples passed by, some holding hands, others leaning close in conversation. Normal people living normal lives. I'd defended my name, but the victory felt hollow. Legally, I was vindicated. Emotionally, I was further from Ava than ever. I checked my phone one more time. No messages, no missed calls, nothing from my daughter. The silence felt final. 3 days after the court hearing, I stood in my kitchen, staring at the wall calendar. April 17th was circled in red. Ava's wedding day. Today. The date I'd once imagined standing proudly beside her. Now the day I was legally barred from attending. Not by court order anymore, but by something stronger. Her choice. The doorbell rang, breaking my trance. Luis stood on my porch, manila envelope in hand, wearing the sympathetic smile of a friend who knows exactly what day it is. "Kim sent these for you to sign," he said, stepping inside. "Final paperwork on the filings." I nodded, grateful for the distraction. "Coffee?" "Already made a pot," I said, leading him into the kitchen. We sat at my worn oak table, the same one where Ava used to do her homework while I made dinner. Luis slid the documents across to me. Statements, declarations, all the formal language of justice without the satisfaction of healing. "You going to go near there today?" Luis asked carefully, warming his hands around his mug. The question hung between us. Was I going to be the bitter ex-father stalking around the chapel, the sad man parked across the street, or the ghost who pretended this day wasn't happening? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to see her, even from a distance. Part of me thinks that's pathetic. Luis nodded slowly. Whatever you decide, call me after. Don't sit alone with it all night. I signed the paperwork, my signature looking steadier than I felt. You know what kills me? I said, pushing the papers back. I keep wondering if she even knows what day it is for me. If she even thinks about what this feels like from where I'm standing. Luis didn't offer empty reassurances. That's why we'd been friends for 20 years. Across town, Ava stood in her apartment bedroom, staring at her reflection. The veil caught light in delicate patterns across her face as she adjusted it for the third time. You look beautiful, Ben said from the doorway, his voice gentle. Perfect. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Thanks. Ben stepped closer, resting his hands on her shoulders. Everything okay? Fine, she said automatically. Just wedding jitters. But her eyes drifted to the dresser drawer where she'd hidden the folder, Jack's folder, with all those bank statements and transfer records, the truth she still hadn't confronted her mother about. Ava slid the drawer open, touched the edge of the folder, then closed it again. Not today, she whispered. The doorbell rang, and Ben squeezed her shoulders. That's probably your mom. I'll get it. Moments later, Tara swept into the bedroom, radiant in her mother-of-the-bride dress, perfect makeup barely concealing the tension around her eyes. Oh, sweetheart, you're a vision! She embraced Ava, careful not to disturb the veil. Rick's voice boomed from the living room as he chatted with Ben. Going to be the event of the season, my man. Wait till you see what we've done with the reception hall. Ava forced herself to smile as her mother fussed with her hair. Are you ready, honey? The cars will be here in 30 minutes. Ready as I'll ever be, Ava replied, glancing once more at the closed drawer. By late afternoon, I'd made my decision. I showered, shaved, and put on a decent shirt. Not the suit I'd bought months ago for this day, but something presentable. I wasn't crashing the wedding. I just needed to see it, somehow. The chapel sat on a quiet corner downtown, its stone facade warm in the fading sunlight. I drove past once, checking the parking lot, already filling with cars. Another circuit around the block, and I found a spot across the street, partially obscured by a row of hedges, but with a clear view of the entrance. I killed the engine and sat there, feeling both ridiculous and desperate. What was I hoping to see? What good would this do? But I couldn't drive away. Not yet. The first guests were arriving, moving up the steps in colorful clusters. I recognized some of Tara's family, a few of Ava's college friends. No one would notice me here, just another car on a busy street. I watched the building where, in less than an hour, my daughter would walk down an aisle I'd never see, escorted by a man who'd stolen not just my money, but my place, the man who would get to say, "Her mother and I." The sunset painted the chapel windows golden as I sat motionless, eyes fixed on the doors that would soon open for the wedding I wasn't invited to attend. I arrived early, parking far enough away that no one would recognize my truck. The morning air had that perfect spring quality, not too warm, not too cool, the kind of day wedding photographers pray for. I sat on a bench across from the chapel for a while, then moved to the curb when guests started arriving, just another spectator blending in with the parked cars and weekend pedestrians. The chapel windows were stained glass, but the entrance doors had clear panels. I could see inside to the flower arrangements, white roses and something blue, probably hydrangeas. Ava always loved hydrangeas. I remembered planting them in our backyard when she was 7, her little hands patting dirt around the roots while I held the watering can. By 10:30, the sidewalk buzzed with arriving guests. I recognized Tara's sisters, some old neighbors, a few of Ava's friends from college. None of them noticed me. I wasn't exactly hiding, but I wasn't announcing myself either. Just standing there, hands in pockets, watching people file in to celebrate a moment I'd been erased from. Through the glass doors, I caught glimpses of activity. Ushers seating people, the minister arranging papers, and then Rick. He emerged from a side room in a tailored black suit with a subtle pattern, adjusting his cuffs. Even from a distance, I could see his practiced smile, the way he nodded and greeted people like he was hosting a corporate event. The man looked comfortable in the role that should have been mine. Tara appeared beside him moments later in a shimmering blue dress, her hand possessively on his arm. She was glowing with something that looked like triumph, her chin slightly lifted as she scanned the filling pews. I'd seen that expression before, in court, when she thought she was winning. A flutter of white near the back caught my eye. Ava. She was partially visible through a doorway, surrounded by what must have been bridesmaids. Even from this distance, even through glass, she looked beautiful. Her dress caught light in ways that reminded me of her mother 25 years ago. But her posture was different. More contained, her shoulders stiff despite the delicate fabric flowing around her. The crowd started settling. An usher closed the main doors, but I moved to where I could still see through the side window. Someone began playing music. Not the processional yet, but something gentle to quiet the room. I watched as Rick disappeared toward the back, where Ava waited. The minutes stretched uncomfortably. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't quite get a full breath. Then the music changed. The wedding party began their entrance. One by one, couples walked the aisle, smiling and measured. The congregation stood. And then, there they were. Rick and Ava appeared at the far end of the aisle. His arm was crooked. Her hand rested lightly on it. She was smiling, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze was fixed somewhere middle distance, not really seeing the guests who beamed at her. Just before they took their first step, Ava's head turned slightly toward the main doors. One fleeting second of hesitation, a glance toward the entrance where, in another life, I might have been waiting. Then she looked forward again and began walking with Rick. I felt something in my chest crack open. Not dramatically, not with any sound or gesture anyone would notice. Just a quiet breaking, watching my daughter move through a moment we'd both been robbed of. The tears didn't fall. They just sat heavy in my eyes as I watched through the window. This was it, the visual confirmation of what I'd known intellectually for weeks. I was witnessing the rewriting of my own story, my role edited out by people who found me inconvenient to their narrative. I didn't stay for the vows. I couldn't bear to see Rick standing proudly beside her or Tara's satisfied expression from the front row. I turned away as they reached the altar, walking with measured steps back to my truck. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but my face was calm. I didn't drive home. Instead, I headed toward downtown, toward Kim Nguyen's office building where I knew she'd be waiting, even on a Saturday. She looked up when I walked in, no surprise on her face. "You went?" It wasn't a question. "I watched from outside," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It's done." The forensic audit folder sat on her desk, thick with documented evidence, affidavits and filing paperwork. Months of work by her team and Luis, tracking every dollar. "Are you sure?" Kim asked quietly. I nodded, taking the pen she offered. One by one, I signed the final affidavits authorizing court filings against Tara and Rick for misused funds, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The last signature done, I capped the pen and set it down. "No more lies," I whispered. Kim gathered the documents, her expression professional but her eyes sympathetic. The wedding reception would be starting soon across town, champagne flowing, toasts being made. By Monday morning, those celebrations would crash into the reality of what they'd done. I like to imagine the moment it happened, Not because I'm cruel, but because sometimes justice needs to be witnessed, even if only in your mind. Tara would have been glowing, champagne flute in hand, laughing that practiced laugh she uses when she wants to seem carefree. Rick beside her, his arm around her waist, king of his castle. The reception hall glittering with lights and flowers they'd paid for with my money. Then the wedding planner approaching, face tight with professional concern. The whispered conversation, Tara's smile freezing in place. What do you mean the payment was frozen? The caterer would have been next, then the venue manager, all with the same message. Checks canceled, payments reversed, accounts under investigation. Kim had been thorough. She'd notified every vendor directly while the motion processed, warning them about accepting disputed funds. You could be liable as participating parties if you knowingly accept payment from accounts under legal scrutiny, she'd told them. I hadn't asked for those details. Kim just handled things that way. Clean, complete, by the book. I sat on my back porch that evening, a glass of whiskey untouched beside me. The sky had turned that deep blue that comes just before full dark. My phone buzzed. Luis. Motion accepted. All accounts flagged. It's happening. I just texted back. Thanks. Then I turned my phone off and watched night fall completely. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Work, home, sleep. I kept my head down. But news travels fast in small circles. 4 days after the wedding, Luis called again. Rick's been suspended from his position. Ethical concerns. A week later, Tara's attorney reached out to Kim. They want to discuss settlement options. I wasn't surprised. Kim had built an airtight case. The paper trail couldn't be denied. Every dollar I'd paid for Ava's education, housing, and future had been systematically redirected. Vacations, renovations, Rick's new truck. Their lifestyle, built on what should have been our daughter's foundation. What does Kim say? I asked. She says they're desperate. The wedding bills are piling up, Rick's income is gone, and they know they can't win in court. I nodded, though Luis couldn't see me through the phone. Tell her to proceed. I thought about Ava constantly during those days, wondered if she was back from her honeymoon, if she knew what was happening, whether she hated me yet. I got my answer 10 days after the wedding. My phone rang while I was finishing dinner. Ava's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer. Almost. Hello? My voice sounded rough, unused. Did you do this? Her voice was calm but brittle, like ice just before it cracks. Do what, Ava? Don't. The word was sharp. The vendors are calling me. The bank contacted Ben about alternative payment methods. Mom and Rick's accounts are frozen, and their attorney keeps mentioning your name. I set my fork down slowly. Yes. She exhaled, a sound like disappointment made audible. You ruined their lives. They ruined themselves, I said quietly. Every dollar they spent on that wedding was stolen from your future. Every check they wrote was fraud. You could have told me. Her voice wavered slightly. I did tell you. At the diner. You took the folder. Silence stretched between us. I could hear muffled conversation in the background. Ben, probably, trying to offer support. This isn't what I wanted, she finally said. What did you want, Ava? I asked, genuinely curious. For me to keep paying while they kept lying? For me to smile while they erased me? I wanted my family. So did I. More silence. Ben's trying to help sort this out, she said eventually. He says maybe we can all talk, find some middle ground. I almost laughed. Middle ground? As if this were a minor disagreement about holiday plans. There's no middle ground with theft, sweetheart. The old endearment slipped out before I could catch it. The court will decide the settlement. Your mom and Rick will pay back what they took. And then what? She asked. We all just move on? I didn't have an answer that wouldn't hurt her more. The truth was, I didn't know if there was a path back from this, for any of us. I hope so, I lied. I could hear Ben's voice again in the background, Words indistinguishable but tone soothing. Always the peacemaker, that one. "I have to go," Ava said. "Okay." "This isn't over," she added. But it wasn't a threat. It sounded more like a plea. The line went dead. I set my phone face down on the table, the screen still glowing for a few seconds before fading to black. Summer faded into autumn, without a word from either side. The leaves turned golden, then brown, scattered across my lawn, and still no call came. I raked them methodically each weekend, the rhythmic scraping against earth becoming a kind of meditation. I thought about calling her sometimes. My thumb would hover over her contact, but I never pressed it. What was there to say now? The damage was done. The truth was out. And sometimes, truth doesn't heal. It just confirms what we already feared. October brought the first frost and news from Kim that the settlement negotiations were progressing. Tara had stopped fighting and started calculating. Rick's employment situation had become untenable, Kim said with professional satisfaction. His company's ethics board couldn't overlook court documents detailing how he'd systematically redirected funds meant for his stepdaughter. "They're selling the house," Luis told me over coffee in November. "Listed last week. Way under market value." I nodded, but said nothing. The victory felt stale, like old bread. "You don't seem happy about it," Luis observed. "I'm not unhappy," I clarified. "I'm just empty." And that was the truth of it. I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Justice, accountability, consequences for their betrayal. But I'd lost the one thing that mattered most in the process. By December, the settlement was formalized, a payment schedule stretching over 2 years. Rick had filed for bankruptcy protection. Their perfect life was dismantled, piece by piece. I was sorting through bills at my kitchen table one evening when I found it. A pale blue envelope with my address written in familiar, careful handwriting. Ava's handwriting. My heart stumbled in my chest. Inside was a simple Christmas card. No family photo, no lengthy update. Just a note in the same careful script. "I hope you're okay. I still think of you every time I pass the diner." I sat there for a long while, card in hand, watching darkness gather outside my window. I remember the smell of the pine wreath on my front door, the distant sound of a neighbor's holiday music. Memories surfaced like bubbles in still water. Ava, at 7, helping me string lights on our tree. At 12, carefully wrapping presents for her mother. At 16, drinking hot chocolate after winter driving practice. I've never been a man of many words, but I knew I needed to answer. I found a sheet of plain stationery in my desk drawer and wrote the only truth I could offer. "I'm better now. I hope you are too." The next morning, I mailed it before sunrise, the post office empty except for me and a sleepy clerk. The card slipped from my fingers into the outgoing mail slot with a soft thump that sounded like an ending. That was the last time we spoke. Winter gave way to spring. The legal proceedings concluded quietly, the way these things do when money changes hands and paperwork is filed. Tara's settlement payments arrived regularly. Rick's bankruptcy handled the rest. They'd moved to a smaller house across town. I heard they were struggling but surviving. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel anything but a heavy kind of peace, the kind that comes after a storm passes, when you survey the damage and know reconstruction will be slow but possible. Because the truth is, revenge always costs something worth keeping. I wanted justice. I got it. But I also lost the only person whose forgiveness would have meant anything. In late April, almost exactly a year after the wedding, I found myself walking down that same street where I'd stood watching through chapel windows. The trees had leafed out. Small flowers pushed through soil along the sidewalk. Everything continuing its cycle, oblivious to human pain. I stopped under a streetlight, the same one where I'd leaned that day, hidden from view but witness to everything. The chapel was quiet now, waiting for another couple's promises. "We both did what we had to," I whispered to no one. "Ava and I both know too much damage was done to stitch this back together. She chose loyalty once, I chose retribution later. And both choices left scars neither of us knows how to heal." I turned and walked away, my shadow stretching long on the pavement behind me. Justice achieved. Family severed forever. I believe stories such as this find us for a reason. If this one touches you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day. In the meantime, there are 2 stories on the screen that are even better.